It was nearing the end of another long Saturday shift at the grocery store, and the seafood department where I worked was unusually quiet. The fluorescent lights hummed above as I removed scales from Atlantic salmon in the sink, getting ready to cut them into steaks. My coworker Francisco was late, which was unusual for her. When she finally arrived, there was a subtle but unmistakable unease in her stride and a slight tremor in her hands that I saw as she pulled on her apron and came over to join me. Everything okay? I asked, trying to catch her eye as she started to rearrange the already neat packages of salmon and cod that were in the counter. Yeah, just tired, she replied. Her voice lacked its usual warmth. The store was almost empty, save for a soft clatter of a lone shopper's cart in the next aisle over. The silence seemed to weigh on Francisca, drawing her further inward. To stir some life to our dreary evening, I decided to shift the conversation towards something more engaging. Hey, have you ever experienced anything strange, something you couldn't quite explain? I asked, half jokingly, as I scooped some crushed ice into the display. Francisca paused, her expression distant, as if she were sifting through her memories. After a moment, she glanced around, leaning closer, and lowered her voice. Actually, I have, she began, her eyes locking onto mine. It happened when I was younger, during a family trip to Portugal. My interest piqued, I encouraged her to continue. Portugal was her family's homeland, and she often reminisced about her visits there, though she never mentioned anything out of the ordinary before. It was supposed to be a reunion of sorts, Francisca continued, her hands now still. We went to Serra da Estrela, the highest mountain range in the country. It's known for its rugged terrain, vast forests, and, as I later found out, its legends. She chuckled nervously, as if the word legends tasted strange on her tongue. The locals there are very superstitious, she said. They warned us about wandering off the marked trails. They said the mountain had its own way of dealing with curious and careless onlookers. They talked about the Cape Lobo, a creature that was part man, part beast, and roamed the mountain, protecting its secrets. The way Francisca spoke, the ambient noise of the store seemed to fade into the background. Her voice carried a weight and sincerity that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I found myself leaning in, hanging on her every word, and as the mundane setting of our seafood department gave way to a shadowy, mystical slopes of Sierra de Estrella in my imagination, little did I know her story was just the beginning, and what followed would chill me to the bone. Francisco's family arrived in Serra de Estrella, bathed in a golden glow of the summer early afternoon. The mountains rose majestically around them. The peaks were scraping the bluest skies she had ever seen. They checked into a quaint inn nestled in the sleepy village, where the air was crisp and scented with pine and wildflowers. Francisca recalled the excitement that bubbled within her and the thrill of exploring her ancestors' homelands. Her parents were equally animated and eager to reconnect with distant relatives and share in the adventure. The first couple of weeks were magical, Francisca said, her voice momentarily lightening as she described the village festivals, the nights filled with music and dance, and the days spent wandering through vibrant markets and ancient ruins. But as the initial joy of the holiday began to settle, her uncle, who was more adventurous, suggested they take a hike deeper into the mountains. He was fascinated by the local lore, she explained, and he somehow convinced all of us to explore beyond the usual tourist paths. Before they set out, the family stopped at a local cafe to stock up on supplies. There they entered and found an elderly villager who, upon hearing about their plan, seemed really stern and concerned. He warned about the Cape Lobo. His voice was grave, and he stressed the importance of staying on the marked trails. The creature is said to be the mountain's guardian, the old man told them, his eyes clouded with a mix of fear and respect. It protects the wilderness from those who disrespect its sanctity. Many have strayed and not returned. Francisca's mother was visibly shaken by the warning, but her uncle dismissed the old man's words as mere superstition to scare away tourists from hidden hiking spots. Legends are often just stories, he chuckled, adjusting his backpack. Despite the warning, the thrill of the adventure and the promise of undiscovered paths egged them on. As they ventured into the forest, the well-trodden paths gave way to wilder terrain. The trees grew denser, the air cooler, and the sounds of civilization faded until all that surrounded them was the untouched beauty of nature and the occasional distant echo that didn't quite sound like birds or the wind. Francisca remembered how the shadows seemed to play tricks on their eyes. Several times they thought they saw movements in the periphery of their vision, quick, fleeting shapes that vanished when they looked at them directly. Her father often paused, uneased, with knitting his brows, and he peered into the thickets, only to shake his head and urge the group to keep moving forward. The deeper they went, the more the sense of adventure was replaced by a nagging dread. The sun's rays barely penetrated the thick canopy above, casting eerie patterns on the forest floor. Their laughter and chatter dwindled, replaced with heavy silence, punctuated by the crunch of their boots and the occasional, inexplicable rustle that seemed too close to comfort. Francisca stopped, a chill running down her spine as she recounted the moment that they found the abandoned shepherd's hut. It was hidden in a small clearing, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. The door was ajar, swinging softly as if it had just been left behind, but the village, it was miles away. No one should have been there. Despite the clear signs that should have told them to turn back, curiosity and her uncle's unyielding spirit drove them to investigate the hut. As the air grew colder and they approached the dilapidated structure, its wooden frame creaked with the burden of many winters. Francisca's heart thudded loudly in her chest, her instincts screaming that something was amiss. They paused at the threshold, the door hanging crooked on its hinges, swaying with a soft, eerie squeak that mimicked the rhythm of their pulsing nerves. Her uncle, emboldened by curiosity and perhaps even defiance of the old man's warnings, was the first to step inside. The rest followed hesitantly. Inside, the hut was shrouded by shadows, the light from their flashlights casting strange, dancing figures on the walls. Old tools, a broken chair, and scattered belongings suggested a hasty departure. Cobwebs laced the corners, and a thick layer of dust blanketed everything, disturbed only by their careful footsteps. As they explored, Francisca felt a growing sense of unease. The air was thick, heavy with a silence that almost felt suffocating. She could hear her own breath, ragged and loud in her ears, as the muffled sound of her family moved around. There was a palpable tension, as if the hut itself held its breath, watching and waiting. Suddenly, a chilling howl shattered the distance, slicing through the air like a sharp blade. It was a sound unlike any animal that Francisca knew, primal and terrifying, echoing off the mountains and seeping into their bones. Panic seized them as they rushed outside, their hearts pounding in a frantic rhythm. Outside, the forest has transformed. The twilight that had once seemed serene now loomed ominously, and the trees whispered a secret language through the rustling leaves and creaking branches. The uncle was nowhere to be seen. Calls for him went unanswered, his name dissolving into the thickening fog that seemed to envelop them in a suffocating embrace. Francisca's father tried to maintain calm, organizing a quick search of the area, but the howls grew closer, more aggressive. That was when Francisca saw it, just a glimpse in the mist. A figure large and distorted, its eyes reflecting dim of their flashlights with a malevolent glow. The Cape Lobo. It was no longer just a story. It was there watching them, its presence an oppressive force that pushed them to the edge of terror. The creature moved with a haunting grace, almost blending into the shadows, yet distinctly there, its silhouette a nightmarish fusion of man and beast. Its cap, though ragged, was unmistakable, made of straw that seemed to whisper with the wind. They ran, driven by raw fear, stumbling through the underbrush, guided by their desperate need to escape. Behind them, the howls continued, a constant reminder of the predator on their heels. It was a chase not just for safety, but for sanity, as the boundaries of reality and legend blurred into a horrifying ordeal. When they thought all hope was lost, they burst through a clearing and were met with a group of local hunters, alerted by the noise and carrying torches that pierced the darkness. The sight of other humans was a relief so profound that Francisca nearly collapsed. With their help, they began a frantic, all-out search for the uncle, calling his name and into the encroaching darkness. Each shout a mixture of hope and dread. The hunters, experienced and stern-faced, formed a protective ring around Francisca and her family, their torches casting long, flickering shadows across the forest floor. They moved with deliberate, cautious steps, their eyes scanning the dark spaces between the trees, their rifles ready. The presence of these seasoned locals seemed to stifle the howls, which gradually receded into a haunting silence that hung heavily in the air. Francisca's father explained the situation in hushed, urgent tones, while the mother clung to her, her eyes wide and tearful. The hunters exchanged quick, knowing looks. Clearly, the legend of Cape Lobo was all too familiar for them. They spoke in low, serious voices about other instances, whispers of missing livestock, and the rare, unlucky hiker who ventured too far into the Cape Lobo's domain. The search for her uncle intensified. They spread out in a wider arc, the hunters guiding them through the treacherous paths, their torches slicing through the darkness. Francisca's heart pounded with a mix of hope and terror, each call for her uncle a desperate plea into the void of the night. After what felt like an eternity, a shout through the trees echoed. One of the hunters had found something. He rushed to the location, and their hearts all were in their throats. There, slumped against a tree on the edge of a small ravine, was her uncle. He was dazed but alive, his clothes torn and his face pale under the ghostly light of the moon. Relief washed over Francesca as they helped him to his feet. He spoke in a trembling voice, his words disjointed and frantic. He'd seen the Cape Lobo up close, he claimed, his eyes burning with an otherworldly fire. Its foul breath, with the scent of decay, it had chased him, he said, but inexplicably spared his life, vanishing just as swiftly as it had appeared. As they made their way back to the village, the hunters shared tales of the Cape Lobo. They described it as the spirit of the mountain, a guardian of sorts. They pushed those who disrespected the natural order. It was not a beast that killed for sport, but a sentinel that maintained the sanctity of its terrain. They warned that its appearance was a reminder of the delicate balance between man and nature, balance that should not be tampered with. The group emerged from the forest edge just as the first light of dawn began to break, the night's terror fading like a bad dream, but the scars of the night were real, palpable in their exhausted expressions and shaken spirits. They were safe for now, escorted by the hunters, but the memory of the night's ordeal would linger long after their return to that village. The haunting image of the Cape Lobo, that dreadful fusion of man and beast, would be forever etched in Francisca's mind. Chilling testament to the mysteries hidden in the wild and ancient places of the world. Back in the village, as the first rays of morning sun warmed the cobblestone streets, Francisca and her family found themselves huddled together in a small inn, trying to process the night's terror. Her uncle sat quietly by the window, staring out with a vacant look forever changed by his encounter. Francisca's parents spoke in low tones with the innkeeper, recounting the ordeal, but leaving out the fantastical elements, afraid they might not be believed. Villagers, however, did not doubt their story. It seemed the legend of the Cape Lobo was ingrained in the local consciousness, a dark and cautionary tale that everyone knew, but few spoke about openly. The innkeeper, an old woman, brought them warm tea and pastries. Her eyes were sympathetic. "You've seen what we seldom speak of," she said gently. "It's a rare thing, and not without meaning. Perhaps it's best if some places are left to their own, respected and untouched." Francisca listened, the weight of the woman's story sinking deep. As the days grew brighter and the village came to life, the surreal quality returned to normalcy around them. Children played in the streets, vendors opened their shops, and life continued as if the terrors of the night were just shadows, fleeting and unsubstantial. Before leaving Serra da Estrela, Francisca's family made a quiet pact never to venture into those wild parts again, to respect the boundaries that had been set by something ancient and powerful. Her uncle never spoke of what he saw during those lost hours in the woods, keeping the details to himself, a personal burden that he chose to carry alone. Years later, Francisca told me the story in the dim light of that seafood department, her voice steady but her eyes distant. She ended her tale with a sigh, a mix of relief and residual fear. "I believe every word she told me," she said, "because there's a truth to some legends, a truth that lives in the unexplained and the unseen." As we finished stacking the last of the fish and cleaned our work area, I found myself glancing more often than usual at the dark corners of the storeroom, a chill occasionally running down my spine. The normalcy of our surroundings, the mundane tasks of closing up shop, they all felt strangely fragile, as if a thin veil had been lifted, revealing a world much larger and more mysterious than I'd ever imagined. Francisca and I never discussed the Cape Lobo again, but something unspoken lingered between us. A shared understanding of the mysteries that lurk in the wild places of the world, mysteries that are sometimes better left alone. Her story stayed with me, a haunting reminder that there are things beyond our understanding, guarding their secrets in the shadows of the ancient mountains.